Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to our video from NOS 130, NOS, 230.
Yeah, 230.
I said 130, didn't I?
Yeah.
Thank you, Donavon. We are the five who are producing and acting, directing, and writing this video. I am the one who should not be named, but you can call me Fuzzy.
I'm Donavon. I'm the director, one of the directors, I guess.
I'm Thuan, and I'm one of the scriptwriters.
I'm Carla. I'm a director.
And I'm Stephen Wade, and I'm the director, the head of the IT department.
And we are, hopefully, going to teach you a little about computers today. Thank you.
Hello class, this is an introduction to Active Directory, a slideshow made by Stephen and edited by me, Donavon. Alright, here we go. In this slideshow we're going to talk a lot about Active Directory, everything from its history to its forests. The Active Directory, like many IT efforts, originated out of a democratization of design using requests for comments, or RFCs. The Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, which oversees the RFC process, has accepted numerous RFCs initiated by widespread participants. Active Directory incorporates decades of communications technologies into the overarching Active Directory concept, then makes improvements upon them. Prior to Windows 2000 Server, Windows NT provided basic directory services that enabled admins to create groupings called domains. Each domain was hosted by one or more servers called domain controllers. This service was severely limited compared to the Active Directory service introduced by Windows 2000 Server. What is Active Directory? Active Directory is the directory service that Microsoft first introduced in Windows 2000 Server and is included in Windows 2008 Server as a set of processes and services. Active Directory can subdivide a domain into organizational units and populate them with objects. It also creates multiple domains and groups them into sites, trees, and forests, provides a highly flexible architecture that accommodates the smallest to the largest organizations, and provides a variety of design options. This is an example of an Active Directory domain. It may look confusing at first, but it is simply an organized collection of objects such as users, computers, and printers, and attributes such as names, descriptions, and who has permission to access what. And this is all managed by one or more servers called domain controllers. In this slideshow, we'll go into more detail explaining all of these things. Then our video will be handed over to our guest speaker, the big elf himself, Santa Claus. The primary functions of Active Directory are authentication, the process of verifying a user's identity, and authorization, the process of granting the user access only to the resources that they are permitted to use. An Active Directory is organized by objects and attributes. The two basic classes of objects are container objects and leaf objects. A container object is one other objects are subordinate to, like branches of a tree. A leaf object cannot have subordinate objects, like leaves. An attribute is stored information about the object, and all objects have attributes. Here is an example of a user object. The user object has the attributes to specify the user's name, address, telephone number, and other identifying information as seen on the screenshot to the right. Here's another diagram of objects and attributes. Here on the left we can see that we have computers and users as objects with their attributes listed next to them. Over on the right in the Active Directory we can see the computers and users listed with their name attribute on display. Here on the right we can see all the attributes of a user listed out. Now that we've gone over objects and attributes, we're going to go over directory schema. Directory schema is an Active Directory component that specifies the attributes each type of object can possess, such as the type of data to be stored as attributes and the object's place in directory tree. Here's an example on the screenshot of additional user attributes added to the directory schema by Microsoft Exchange, as shown to the right. With that out of the way, we'll talk about domains. A domain is a logical container of each network component over which the administrator has control. Domains function by default for virtually all directory functions, including administration, access control, database management, and replication. Each domain has at least one domain controller. Here we have the diagram of a forest. A forest contains domains. This one has one root domain with other domains branching off of it, or one domain tree. A forest is used to define the scope of authority of the administrators, while a domain contains organizational units and is used to partition the directory data and control application. The organizational units contain users and computer accounts and is used to delegate control and apply policies. Now we can talk about groups. Groups can have members located anywhere in the domain. The members of a group can be leaf objects, such as users, computers, and other groups. There are two types of groups in the Active Directory. Security groups, which administrators use to assign permissions and user rights to a collection of objects, and distribution groups, which applications use for non-security related functions, such as sending an email message to the users. The three types of security group scopes are domain local groups, to assign permissions to resources in the same domain, global groups, to organize users who share similar network access requirements, and universal groups, to assign permissions to related resources in multiple domains. Here's an example of groups. On the right, you can see there are several of them in this directory. Each of them has an attribute listing what users are part of them, while each user also has an attribute saying what groups they are part of. Here we have the different scopes of group available. A domain local group has members from any domain in the forest and is used to access resources in one domain. A global group has members from own domain only and is used for access to resources in any domain. And a universal group has members from any domain in a forest and is used to access resources in any domain. Here you can see where you can select the group scope or the group type when you're creating or editing a group. AGULP is a traditional mnemonic for remembering the nesting capabilities of Active Directory groups. AGULP stands for Accounts, Global Groups, Universal Groups, Local Groups, and Permissions. Here is a useful table for determining the types of access different group scopes have. We don't expect you to memorize it just yet. And that's it for our slideshow. We hope we've helped you understand a little bit more about active domains. Santa Claus is coming up next, so stay tuned.
Hey everybody, you have to excuse me, I'm a little out of breath. We just had practice with the elves, and them guys are hard to keep up with. So if I have to stop, take a breath, please forgive me. But welcome to the IT department of the North Pole. Today we're going to talk about several different subjects, myself and some of my minions. The good ones, not the bad ones, the good ones. And we're going to take turns, and hopefully we can tell you some of the things that we do, and you'll understand what we do. First of all, here I'm talking about a global catalog. Now, a global catalog is exactly that, okay? But our textbook says a Windows server with Active Directory service installed. Each workstation computer joins the domain and is represented by a computer object. Administrators, like myself, create user objects that represent human users. A domain differs from a work group because users, excuse me, again, out of breath, because users log on to the domain once, rather than to each individual computer. A global catalog is a domain controller that stores a copy of all Active Directory objects in a forest. The global catalog stores a full copy of all objects in the directory for its host domain, and a partial copy of all objects for all other domains in the forest. So that means mine would be the host domain, and anyone else underneath me are other domains and not have the same privileges as I do, even though they may be the host of their own domain. With that said, it being the official definition of the global catalog, it is not as hard as it sounds to know what's going on and how it's used. The global catalog is simply a list of all the objects in the forest, along with a subset of each object's attributes. Simply put, it's like a reference library of everything the host or owners have of what they own or possess. Continuing deeper into the forest or the neighborhood, it has a library of partially all the other items or objects in other domains, not directly owned by the first owner. Why? The partial collection of objects, domain objects, is a list of the most commonly searched or used objects. Shortcuts, as they may be named. It makes sense to have a list of popular items to be searched that is not directly in your library, while everything that is in your own library is listed and inventory. Well, a global catalog is created automatically on the initial domain controller in the forest. We have a list of everything you own, while you may not have a list of everything your neighbors own, especially if it is off your site. Searches that are directed to the global catalog are faster because they do not involve referrals to different domain controllers. Every domain controller in a forest stores a full, writable copy of a single domain directory partition. Every other domain has a full list of what they own. So to search it makes it an easier task than having to search every volume stored on a separate computer or server. The global catalog provides the ability to locate objects on any domain without having to know the name of that domain. That's pretty good because it's like looking for a book in the library. You don't know what the name of the book is, but you know what you want. The individual domain controller, your neighbor, Tooth Fairy, leprechauns, different things like that, and a unicorn or two. We've only got 2 left. Both guys, I don't know what we're going to do about it. Anyway, the individual domain controller, your neighbor, will have a list of their properties, which you're basically just asking what something is on their list without having to know exactly what you're looking for. It puts you in the local list per se and leads your search from there. The main thing we have to remember about global catalogs is if you're only allowed access to objects or information, or like in a library, books, that you have permission to look in. It's like a rating for the movies. If it's the R rating and you don't have the R rating, you're not going in. If you're not 17, you're not going in. And we're not even talking about X rated. If you do not have the permission needed, you do not see the information or object in the list of search results. In other words, you can search for it all day long and it won't come back to you. Again, if you don't have permission, you can't find it. So remember, I'm watching you. Hello again. This time, I'm not quite as out of breath as I was before, and I'm going to talk about a different subject. I'm going to talk about domains. Some of the things you have to do, and now this is typically straight out of our textbooks for IT. You have to choose a design paradigm. The design of the domain space should be based on the structure of the organization. In other words, you work it from the top down, just like a tree, a pyramid. Not a pyramid scheme, but a pyramid. Most commonly used paradigms are the geographic, which is representative of the organization's physical locations, and the political, in which the design conforms to the divisions or departments within the organization. It is generally a good idea to stick to one of these options throughout the domain design and not try to combine the two, because if you do, you're liable to confuse yourself and make it too hard to do, or too hard to use. Okay, on designing the tree structure, as you decide how many domains you're going to create, because you can create as many as you want being the administrator, you should be thinking about how or if you're going to arrange them in the form of a tree. This also includes deciding how you're going to name your domains and which domain will be the forest root. The forest domain you create in an inactive directory, active directory, not inactive, active directory, forest, the root domain, is critical because it has special capabilities. The administrators of the forest root domain who control the membership of this group must have sufficient seniority in the organization to warrant that responsibility. Okay, think of it this way. The domain is like a forest. You've got Sherwood Forest. Inside Sherwood Forest, you have trees. On a tree, you have leaves. And that's as far as I'm going. I'm not getting to the acorns or flowers or anything like that. Let's just talk about the forest, the tree, and the leaves. Okay, now naming, oh, excuse me, I must be tongue-tied this morning. Too much cocoa. Naming domains. This is a very integral part of tree structure design. The first naming decision that must be made is what to call the tree root domain. Because Active Directory relies on DNS for its naming standard, any existing DNS infrastructure should be taken into account when a tree root domain name is chosen. Alright, we have reasons to create additional domains. Isolated replication. Using a single domain for multiple sites requires domain controllers to replicate the entire domain database across the WAN, W-A-N, links connecting the sites. I think everybody out there should know what a WAN is, or actually a wide area network. Okay, now we do know. If these links are too slow or too expensive to make this practical, creating a separate domain for each site can reduce the replication traffic. The unique domain policy. Although it is possible to assign group policy settings to any domain, site, or organizational unit object, there are certain settings that Windows have traditionally, what does that mean? It means always in the past, has traditionally restricted to the domain level, such as password and account lockout policies. Windows Server 2008 makes it possible to create password setting objects, PSOs, and apply them to individual users and groups. But this requires you to modify the Active Directory schema directly. If there are parts of your organization that need different values for these settings, it can often be easier to create separate domains for them. Well, it's like you might want to give a separate domain to payroll because they're doing things quite different than anybody else in the business. And, you know, we can't short the L's on their paychecks. If we do, I never hear the end of it. You don't want to see a strike on the L's, I'm going to tell you that right now. Domain upgrades. If you have an existing Windows NT domain structure, it may be possible to collapse a number of old Windows NT domains into single Active Directory domain. However, if you do not want to do this right away, you should duplicate the Windows NT domain structure by creating multiple Active Directory domains. Now here's a couple of reasons, at least, to not create additional domains. Size. Size does matter. A single Active Directory domain can easily accommodate millions of objects. So there should be no worry that there may not be enough room for all of the objects. Administration. You can delegate administrative responsibility for part of a domain by using organizational units, or OUs. So there's no need to create additional domains for this purpose. You just have to remember that when you're creating domains, again, you work from the top down. You have a hierarchy. Forest, trees, leaves. And if you think of it that way, that's the easiest way to think of domains and naming domains. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Donovan. I'm the head elf of IT. Santa's stuck in a chimney at practice, so I'm filling in for him right now. Alright, I'm here to talk to you about group policy. So when you assign group policy settings to a domain, the settings apply to all the leaf objects in that domain, but not to the subdomains that are subordinate to it. However, when you assign group policy settings to an organizational unit, those settings apply to all the leaf objects in the organizational unit, and they are inherited by any subordinate OUs it contains. When you're adding additional units to your Active Directory hierarchy, it's not as big an issue as adding domains. You do not need additional hardware, and you can easily move or delete an OU at will. However, you should be conscious of the correct reasons for creating an OU. And I'm going to go over some of those reasons. One is duplicating organizational divisions. The structure of organizational units within your domain should be an extension of the model you use to design the Active Directory domain structure. If, for example, you created domains based on a geographical model, you might want to create organizational units that correspond to the departments in each domain. Conversely, if you use the political model to create your domains, you might want to create OUs based on geographical distribution of your objects. Luckily, we don't have a lot of geography to work with because at the North Pole, we're all one little place. When you're assigning group policy settings, this is another important reason for creating an organizational unit. so that you can give group policy settings to particular collections of objects. When you assign group policy settings to an organizational unit, every object contained by that organizational unit receives those settings, including other organizational units. And delegating administration. This is a really important one because we have a lot of heavy administration up here at North Pole. Mostly just one man delegating everything, but I'd like to help a little bit. One of the primary reasons for creating an organizational unit is because you want to grant certain individuals administrative responsibility for a portion of the Active Directory hierarchy without giving them full access to the entire domain. Because sometimes the assembly line elves or the reindeers, they don't need access to everything. And once you give someone administrative access to an organizational unit, they can create, modify, and delete any type of object beneath that organizational unit. Every organizational unit should have at least 2 administrators in case one becomes locked out. Sometimes Mr. Claus forgets his passwords. All right. Group policy, the primary difference between global and universal groups is that universal groups add more data to the global catalog, thereby increasing the amount of replication traffic between all your sites. If your network consists of a single site, then you can use universal groups across the board. For a multi-site network, you might want to consider using global groups instead to reduce the replication traffic. To deploy group policy settings, you must create group policy objects, or GPOs, and link them to Active Directory domains, organizational units, or sites. Every object in the container to which the GPO is linked receives the settings you configured in it. Linking a GPO to a domain, for example, causes every object in the domain to receive the settings in that GPO. By linking GPOs to organizational units, you can deploy different sets of configuration settings to various parts of the domain. When linking GPOs to organizational units, the most important element to consider is that the group policy settings apply not only to the user and computer objects in an organizational unit, but also to any subordinate organizational units and the leaf objects they contain as well. In other words, group policy settings flow downward from a linked OU all the way to the bottom of the internal domain hierarchy. And that's all we have to go over for group policy.
Now that you have an idea in mind of how Active Directory functions, it's time to see it in action. Up here at the North Pole, we like to use Windows Server 2008. When using a Windows Server 2008 computer as a domain controller, the machine needs to be configured to use static IP addresses, not addresses from a DHCP server. If the domain controller you're creating is part of an existing forest or domain, then the machine must be configured to use the same DNS server that hosts the existing forest or domain during the installation of Active Directory. I have to remind the other elves of this now and then. If everything is set up correctly, we can get to the installation of Active Directory Domain Services role on our North Pole server. Make sure to be logged in with an account that has administrative privileges. Reindeer accounts won't work here. Exit any unnecessary windows that pop up after logging in. Then, if the Server Manager console is not already up, you can click Start, Administrative Tools, and Server Manager. But luckily for us, it's already on the screen. Here we're going to select Roles, and then Add Roles. Here we click Next. We select Active Directory Domain Services checkbox. Then we select Next again. We click Next again, and then Install. This might take a few minutes, so feel free to grab some milk and cookies while you wait. Wizard. Sometimes the other elves get worried when they hear Wizard for the first time. After the installation is complete, we can click Close. Now we can use the Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard. The procedure from here on varies depending on what functions you have in mind for your domain controller. We will show you a few common procedures used by the elves here at the North Pole, starting with how to create a new forest. As you can see, we're back at the Server Manager, which is under Start and Administrative Tools. Here we're going to go under Roles and go to Active Directory Domain Services. After it loads, we're going to go down to Advanced Tools, and we're going to find dcpromo.exe. Clicking that will bring up the Active Directory Domain Services installation wizard. We're going to click Next. Next. We want to create a new domain in a new forest. Click Next. The name of our root domain is going to be northpole.com. We're going to click Next. It's going to check online to see if our forest name is already in use, which I hope not. Might be another prank from those South Polars. Here we get to pick our forest functional level. We want to pick the highest functional level of all domains that we're going to be using, which is going to be 2008. That's all we use up here at North Pole these days. And we're going to click Next. Yes, we want this to be a DNS server, so we're going to click Next. We don't have to worry about this because this is a virtual machine. Just for example purposes here. Gonna click Yes. This is asking where it wants to store the data of our Active Directory. The default settings are fine, so we're gonna click Next. This is going to be the directory service restore mode administrator account's password. And we're just going to use our old standby password, which is capital P at 55W0RD. And we're going to confirm that, capital P at 55W0RD. And we're going to click Next. And Next. And here we have to wait a little bit. And I'll go ahead and let it restart when it's done. Alright, we're back. And as you can see, now we have a domain controller for our elves. I'm going to sign in. Now you should know every domain should have at least 2 domain controllers, just in case something happens to one. You see, Santa is very clumsy with his milk sometimes. So when we're done loading up, we're going to go back into Windows Server 2008 as an admin, then make our way to Start, Administrative Tools, and Server Manager, if it doesn't already pop up for us, which I think it will. Alright, we're back, and as you can see, Server Manager loaded up. So we're going to go to Roles, Active Directory Domain Services. Right, we scroll back down to Advanced Tools, find our old friend dcpromo.exe. After you start it up, you click Next a few times. And then, unlike last time, where we clicked making a domain in a new forest, we would select add a domain controller in an existing forest. And from there on, it would go just the same as it did for us making the first domain. And after the installation process, the computer restarts, and now the domain controller will service the existing domain. Active Directory replication between the two automatically if both domain controllers are located at the same site. And that's it for our demonstration portion of the video. We hope all our hardworking elves out there find it helpful. We would have went into more detail, but we are out of time for our video.
Summary of our video, we went over the history of Active Directory and what it's used for today. We went over objects, attributes, domains, organizational units, groups, and trees and forests, and the importance of designing a schema. And we went into naming domain spaces and designing your infrastructure, what a global catalog is for, and how functional levels work. We went over the installation of the Active Directory domain services role, and creating a new domain in a new forest, and a new domain in an existing forest. And we wrapped it all up before Christmas. So we hope you have a merry one, and a happy new year.